Adelia. Hey everybody, it's Dave here, Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers. We've been commenting on the Vikings publicly for over 2 decades apiece. That is a long time. We've seen a lot of things come and go. We're going to talk about some of those today. But first, we're going to start off with Dalvin Tomlinson. And should he stay or should he go? He's asking himself that question, as I'm sure the Clash is playing in the background. Secondly, we're going to continue in our State of the Vikings series. This time we're looking at the wide receiver room. Yes, we've got the best wide receiver in the NFL, Justin Jefferson. But the question is, what else do we have and what else might we need? Thirdly, we're going to do some quick hitters. First, we're going to talk about the passing, secondly, we're going to talk about the passing of Red McCombs. But first, we're going to talk about a couple of the coaches, the assistant coaches that were hired this week to help fill out the roster, because some of the assistant coaches from last year have moved onward and upward. Good for them. All that next on Two Old Bloggers. Climb in the Pocket, Daily Norseman, and Lake Monster Brewing presents Two Old Bloggers. Starting now. Hey everybody, it's Dave and Darren here. We are your two old bloggers. As usual, first off, we always start off with asking Darren, how are things in the Great White North?
They are fine, Dave. We're just trying to get through this bit of this dead, kind of sort of deadish football period we have here before free agency starts, and not a whole lot of big news, but we do have a few things to talk about today, so happy to get right at it, and everybody can keep on giving Dave comments about how good he looks, too, if you want. Hey. He's had a few so far.
Yes, I appreciate it. I do. All right, with that, let's get this show started. We titled it, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Now you want to add the now as the song goes. And that's the question for Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yeah, anytime you use this sort of a headline, Dave, it just... The Clash song just gets in your head. Unless you're like 30 and under, and then you don't even know who the Clash is.
You're probably 100% correct on that one.
I know I'm 100% correct. They might wear the t-shirts, but they have no idea who the band is. It's just all for show. It's like kids wearing Led Zeppelin t-shirts these days, or like they have no idea who Led Zeppelin is. I digress.
Hey, there's kids these days that is discovering the music from 70s, 80s, and early 90s and thinking it is fantastic. They're remixing it. They're playing it like it was brand new, just came out last week, and that's because Gen X's music is the best music. Just sorry to say, that's the way it works. But we're on to theme one.
Dalvin Tomlinson. Yes, Dave. Initially, we thought that Tomlinson's contract was going to get voided on Monday, February the 20th. Then the word got out that actually the Vikings and Tomlinson had agreed to extend the void and make the void date March 15th. Pretty significant because as we were talking about offline, actually online, but off the show, was that both parties would have to agree to do this. So that means that there's mutual interest from the Vikings and from Tomlinson and his agent to try to work something out. and so we'll work something out they're going to do. And also right now it avoids, we'll see, but um, if Tomlinson's contract had voided, then that 7.5 million would have been dead cap money
right now.
that has right now, and that had been accounted for as I understand it, in what was the projected amount that the Vikings were going to be over the cap anyway. But I think a significant thing. Dave, we all know that the Vikings defense was terrible last year. Everybody knows that. And so I think that when that happens, there's a pull from the particularly from fans who just want to get rid of everybody and like that, get rid of all 11 starters on the defense. None of them are any good. But it's very rare. Actually, it never happens that a team's going to turn over 11 starters all in one season. There's usually somebody worth keeping, and you can't fill that many holes. So, and actually, Dalvin Tomlinson is, if you're looking to keep, if you want the Vikings defense to get better, obviously, and Dalvin Tomlinson, based on how he played last year, would be one of those guys you would not probably want to move on from right now if you want the Vikings defense to improve. You're flashing his PFF grades up there. As we always say, it's PFF, so take it with a grain of salt, but they do watch these guys closely and come up with their rankings. So sometimes they make sense. I think in this case, Dalvin Tomlinson's grade does make sense. It was very good. As you say, it's about 77 overall. He was ranked 14th out of 67 defensive tackles who had at least 400 snaps. So he was a high performer. And 29 pressures he got were a career best. So pretty good year for Tomlinson. The eye test, Dave, I think you and I would agree, was that we thought Tomlinson played quite well when he was in. He did miss 4 games, I think, because of a calf injury.
Right. It shows they have him at 30 pressures, but at only 604 snaps. And if you compare that for snaps, that's about half. The Vikings had about 1,200 defensive snaps during the season, approximately. And that's about half. And 30 pressures on half of that's not bad. If you want to work that out to at least 3/4, that pumps it up to about 45 pressures. That is a good contribution.
It sure is. And Tomlinson did provide a very, I think, important contribution to the Vikings defense. As bad as it was last year, it might have been a lot worse without him. And for Tomlinson, he was really, of the Vikings defensive linemen, whether it's Ross Blacklock, James Lynch, Jonathan Bullard, even Harrison Phillips. You got to do that at least once a show, Dave?
I usually do it, but yes.
Say Harrison Phillips instead of Harrison Smith instead of Harrison Phillips. But rarely did those guys make any kind of impact plays. Dalvin Tomlinson consistently was making impact, good plays that you noticed, that even fans like myself noticed without watching the line too closely. He was a better pass rusher than he was a run defender, but I'll take that. Somebody else can do the dirty work, like Kyrie's Tonga, Harrison Phillips. But the grades are pretty good. Tomlinson's 29. Again, his what he made in his 7.5 million is pretty reasonable. I don't know what he's going to get now, but even though he played well, Dave, his stats are not so gaudy. I think that he's going to get a huge amount of dollars on the open market, even if he hit it. So if both parties are looking to work things out to try to stay with the Vikings, I think that Tomlinson is a guy that the Vikings should look, and they are looking very seriously. I would be quite happy with them keeping Tomlinson if the price is, reasonable, whatever that would be. It could be 8 million range, give or take a bit. And that's one less hole that they have to fill on the defense that's in flux right now as to who's going to be there and who is not going to be there. And it might also save you from having to pick a guy in the draft when you have limited draft picks so far.
And it's good. And interior defensive linemen tend to be still good into their younger 30s. So I would enjoy it. I think it would be good and a good selection. It's all up to this guy, though. Will Kwesi make that happen? Does that make sense? Him and obviously Brian Flores, along with Kevin O'Connell, are going to work together to make sure that, do I want this piece? Do I want what Dalvin brings? We think the answer is yes, but we're going to have to see. But the whole idea of him saying, no, I'll move my void date to the start of the league new year, which is March 15th. I want to keep talking between now and then, shows some mutual interest. Whether the Vikings asked him to do it or he asked the Vikings to do it, either way, the whole acceptance of it shows that both are interested. And I think that's a good thing for the Vikings.
And they're going to have to, even though March 15th is the void date, that's when free agency will officially start.
Yeah.
But there's always that the tampering period a couple of days before that, something is going to be.
He's under contract right now. They can do anything they want up until March 15th. It's March 15th. If nothing's in place, then he can go shop himself around. And we bite $7.5 million no matter what. If they make a deal prior to March 15th, they can lower that 7.5 to like 2.5 of dead cap, and then whatever else, and then they can massage that. It's next year that's supposed to be the real big jump in the salary cap.
Yes.
And they can, keep it low this year and, put it out 3 or 4 years, give them an extension, and make that money move and give them leverage to move money. And everybody's happy. He's happy because he gets a big signing bonus. Vikings are happy because they have an effective interior defensive lineman who can get pass rush. And I think it's almost a no-brainer. Are you going to find somebody like that in the draft immediately? Doubtful. Just like offensive line, defensive line takes a bit to learn the NFL system and how to get along with it. If you have some rookie, even if they're studs coming out, blue chips, they'll still have their welcome to the NFL moment, because you're going to go against some crusty NFL guy that knows all the tricks of the trade, and they're going to use them on him. Dalvin's been there. He knows that. He's done nothing but get better. I want that to continue. I want him to see him in purple next year.
That's a great point, Dave. You're right. Like the interior guys, whether it's defensive tackles or particularly, like you say, they take some time to mature. Tomlinson is a perfect example of that, because his first 4 years with the Giants, he didn't really emerge as a key guy until like his fourth year, and the Giants didn't think enough of him that they actually tried to extend him beyond that. You see that a lot of times. Another guy that's an example, I think, is Derek Brown from Carolina, who's was like a top 10 pick, I believe, 4 years ago. He's just now is really starting to hit his stride. Another one of those big interior guys. Tomlinson is a guy he's playing his best football right now, and it'd be good to keep him. What we haven't heard on the void stuff, just what we should mention, is that Patrick Peterson's contract was supposed to void on the February 20th. We have not heard anything otherwise. That would indicate, we talked about this earlier shows, Dave, about what Patrick Peterson's future would be with the Vikings, especially when Brian Flores signed on as the defensive coordinator. No doubt Patrick Peterson had a very good year last year. Whether you look at PFF grades or just look at the basic stats like interceptions, pass defense, he had a great year, a renaissance year. But it was in a defensive system that Brian Flores is not going to use. And I don't think he's a good fit for that. He's more of a zone corner at this point in time. And the fact that he didn't work out a void extension of the void date would indicate that, as expected by us, is that he won't be back with the Vikings. They'll be bringing in some other veterans who better suit what Flores is going to run.
I agree. I wanted to bring up Purple and Gold for Days brought up that part of this extending out the void date was an agreement not to franchise tag him. That there, Purple and Gold, shows the willingness, the interest back and forth, and the respect that they're playing. That it's not just all business on the side of the Vikings, but that they actually care for him and they want what's best for him. Hopefully that's with the Vikings. If not, he goes off and hopefully finds green pastures elsewhere. But they're willing to do that and not handcuff him with a franchise tag. So that it shows humanity. And I think that's part of the whole new culture thing, and I think that's a good deal.
Darren Payne or Jermont Jones? Sure, I'd love to add them. Would we have the scratch to get them? Doubtful.
Well, and Tyler and I recorded an episode. He wrote an article about Jalen Ramsey, that the Rams are shopping him around.
Yes.
Would Jalen Ramsey be great on the Vikings? Absolutely. I'd love to have him there. Could we afford a trade? Is it smart to make the trade? Could we afford a salary? Those are whole different questions. So it'd be interesting to find out. I do want to thank everybody that is watching today. We appreciate it. We got quite a few. My Worthless Opinion, Mary, Thaddeer, Purple and Gold for Days, Jason, Raymond, as usual, coming in from PA. We love having you here, and you guys brighten our day, and we hopefully add something to yours as we wrap up, usually, Darren and I, the week's news of what happened during the week. And then obviously during the season, we do the pregame show. And we really do appreciate you joining us. You add to the show, and you guys are rock. And Purple Haze, thanks for joining. Yes, it's my purple flannel. It's probably the last day of this year that I get to wear it because we are warming up here in Texas, which is nothing wrong with. All right, that's the end of our first segment, which always brings us to Badass Wood Art. That's Badass Wood Art is a company started by Lewis in his garage, which is now a shop, full-blown shop, where he makes wood sculpture out of mechanical coping saws, basically. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you want a piece, you can get your first piece for 20% off using the promo code CT Pocket. That would be a good thing to have. Now, yesterday he posted up what he has in his man cave.
Oh, nice.
He's got John Randle, Hall of Famer, right? That he did. That's somebody that means a lot to him. And of course, to all us Vikings fan, Johnny Randle is absolutely the beast, right? We loved him. I still think in my mind of those commercials where he's chasing that chicken with the number 4 jersey around the yard so he can translate that on Sundays. And of course, those were good moments.
One of the rare national TV commercials that ever had a Viking in it, yep. Starring in it. I can't remember too many.
But that is what Lewis does. He makes great work. All you got to do is go to his site. It's called that'sbadasswoodart.com. Check it out. He does do commissions, and he does in various sizes. Whatever you want, he will do it. Get in touch with him. He's a great guy. Mark's saying Johnny was his favorite player when he was younger. Mark, I fully understand why. He was fabulous.
He's still one of my favorites.
Yeah, especially on Fridays.
He's one of my top 5 favorite Vikings of all time. Mm-hmm. And the Vikings have been around a while.
That brings us to theme 2. And somebody had asked, do we trade Cook? We're not going to talk about that this week. However, there will be discussion on that in the future, and we shall find out. But first off, You wanted to talk wide receivers. This is that where we're doing the state of the Vikings and we're looking into each position room. This week we are looking at the wide receivers.
We are, and when I started digging into this, Dave, I thought I was writing a novel. I had so many notes for a while, but I don't know. Wide receiver really interests me. Always does. But yes, this is a state of the units, wide receivers this time, and for wide receivers for the Vikings, what we've got is we've got one elite talent, and then things kind of get murkier after that. I think as to what we got and who's staying and who's going. But of course, the elite guy is the guy up in the picture here right now, Mr. Justin Jefferson, Mr. Gritty, Mr. NFL Offensive Player of the Year. Again, he's been he's given us 3 years of elite level production at wide receiver number 1 since we drafted him, and he's just turned 24. He's been very durable. Played every game. Been able to suit up for every game in his 3 seasons. And so what we've seen from him in the first 3 years, with him only being 24, I think talked about this a few weeks ago. Baseline production from him for the next 5 years, I think at least. If he's a Viking, you can pretty much expect 115 to 120 catches, 1,600 to 1,800 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns. Or more.
I expect Justin Jefferson to be the first 2,000-yard receiver ever within the next 2 years.
And if he hadn't had a couple of dud games this year, he would have actually been that guy. Mm-hmm. He would have had it this year. And those baseline stats, as you were saying, Dave, there's a potential. There's probably could be 1, 2, maybe 3 seasons in that 5-year period where he could eclipse those numbers. So what a weapon to have. And durable, as I say, extremely productive. But we've been getting him on like dirt cheap pay rate for those 3 years, and that's coming to an end this offseason, I believe. I think
it may or may not. We hope it comes to an end this offseason, because if it does, it'll come at a cheaper rate than if we wait a year or even after the 5th year. The longer we wait, the higher that dollar amount goes.
Yes. But I guess my thinking is that going into his 4th season, that I kind of feel that although we haven't heard any rumblings of that yet, and Jefferson said after the season over that he wasn't worried about the contract and he'd let his representatives deal with that. But I kind of feel that, like, with the amount of money that is up for grabs here, if you look what like Tyreek Hill got last year when he got traded to Miami, certainly whatever extension Justin Jefferson is going to get, he's going to be the number 1 paid wide receiver at that point when he signs that deal.
Period. Across the league.
Period.
He's going to set
for 1 year probably, and then somebody else will get it.
Well, or maybe not. It's going to be hard because he literally will be the number 1 wide receiver. He is the number 1 when it comes to production. As long as he keeps that up, he can justify it. And other teams can say, we're not paying you $40 million a year. Justin Jefferson makes $40 million, but we're not paying you $40 million, right? You've got to be, in that top 5 range to get that. So how many free agents or second contract guys fall into that range? We'll have to see. Part of that also depends on quarterback play. You got to have a quarterback that can throw you those balls. And so you got to find that good marriage and then how to pay him. But almost guaranteed he's going to be able to write his own check, and it's going to be hefty. He's going to make quarterback money.
He is, and it's just a matter of when that's going to happen. My feeling is that he's not going to step on the field for OTAs, organized team mini camp, maybe even training camp if an extension isn't worked out this offseason. You kind of disagree on that, but the point is that extension is going to happen. It's a matter of when it's going to happen. When it does happen, it's not going to be cheap, but you got to do it. Like, Justin Jefferson is pretty much the offense right now for the Vikings. Everything kind of revolves around what he does, and
he's become the face of the franchise.
Yes,
right? He's the one that puts butts in seats.
Yeah,
everybody wants to come see him.
I like Cousins, but I don't think a lot of people are paying scratch to watch him play quarterback. They're not saying I'm watching one of the best ever with Kirk Cousins in there, but Justin Jefferson, you're watching one of the best ever to do it, and only in 3 seasons. So
Mhm.
no issues with him at number one. The question for the Vikings is, of course, who's the number two guy?
Well,
you,
first we
you
got to
know,
get past this.
well, yeah, that's where the kind of the extension would come in, and you got to look at, okay, how much are you paying Cousins, and can you afford, like, if you got Cousins who's making a lot this year, and then you got to get Jefferson on the extension. Those are two guys who are going to take up a lot of your cap, and how the Vikings work that, particularly maybe in 2024, is an open question right now. If the if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah does the extension at this offseason, he's going to structure it so that this year the cap hit is going to be minimal while Cousins is on the books for that 6 million or whatever it is, and then which might get reduced if they do the extension thing, which we're going to talk about next week. But yeah, there is a financial dance that's got to be made,
Got to be played
but
yet. Yes.
got to be played. But beyond that, again, who's your number two after Justin Jefferson? We need you need a number two guy, because in those rare gains where Jefferson is getting extra attention, the ball, he's not quite getting quite open as much, or the catches he's getting are for minimal gains, like what happened in the Giants playoff game. Just if he's getting slowed down a little bit, you need that number two guy who can make a defense really pay for devoting all that extra attention to Justin Jefferson, and maybe that and make them decide, pick their poison, who they're going to cover. We don't have that right now. Adam Thielen used to be that guy last year, but he's 33. His production is declining. He's set this offseason to have the second highest cap figure of any Viking. I doubt his production is going to improve a whole lot or at all at his age. And you can't pay a guy who's producing at the level that Adam Thielen is right now the roughly 20 million that he'd be set to make. He talked about how his team is working with the Vikings on the contract to work on getting it down and finding some pay rate that is agreeable to him and the Vikings to bring him back. For a lot of Adam Thielen fans who love the fact that he's a Minnesota boy and he came and was at Minnesota State, blah, blah, blah. That's great news. Not as great news for me. I love Thielen, but I feel like his time is, now is the time to move on from him. Uh, I think the Vikings will bring him back if if the price is right, but I don't really see that Thielen is going to take the reduction in pay that the Vikings would want to just come back to Minnesota. He talked about in his Super Bowl interviews about how I'm still feel great. I can still produce at a high level. If he feels that way, he's going to want to get paid that amount. I just don't. And what is that? Is he willing to go from 20 million, or what his salary would be now, down to maybe 7-8 million a year? I don't know about that. But
Well,
uh,
and this is where a dance comes in that's going to happen here in the coming week when everybody goes to Indianapolis for the combine. When you get all
yes,
those agents and clubs together and they start talking, at the steakhouse and the beer deal and the breakfast joint and all this other stuff, where they meet in the bathroom stall or however they do this, the unofficial tampering, right? Where they get well, how do you feel if they're talking to each other over a cup of coffee or a glass of whiskey and they're like, Adam Thielen, uh, we'd be willing to get him, but we only want to pay him 8 million.
mm-hmm.
And they're talking to Kwesi or whoever, and Kwesi's like, okay, I can understand that. Well, we need to get rid of him because we've got to lower his cap hit. Well, Kwesi can come back to Adams' agent and say, hey, we know Adams being asked for 7-8 million. We'll offer him 9. Pardon me. Offer him 9 if he stays, but he's got to take pay cut down to 9. And it's that dance of, well, his agent going, the best deal you're going to make, the most money you're going to make is to stay here and take a pay
Yes,
cut versus try yourself on the open market, you'll make less and you'll stick to the Vikings, but you won't be a Viking. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I feel now is the time to move on for the Vikings. I think that is going to happen despite what they're working on. Uh, and the logical guy to come in and be at least be given the shot at the number 2 wide receiver spot would be KJ Osborn. Now Osborn's an interesting case, and his numbers last year, production wise, were pretty much the same as they were in his breakout season in 2021. He had a few more catches, 10 more actually, but his yardage was about the same, and he had 2 less touchdown receptions. And his yards per catch average actually was down about 3 yards. Analytics, some of the analytics metrics weren't too impressed with KJ Osborn's year either in 2022. But I like KJ. I think that, and he had a couple of 100-yard games late in the season. But the fact is, sometimes in a lot of games last year, he was the 4th receiving option that Cousins looked at. But if he's the number 2 guy, that elevates him
In the
maybe
progression.
in the progression, and maybe you see a big jump and he gets those number 2 wide receiver numbers. Now he's not a burner like some guys, but he's got good hands. He's tough, and I like him. And I think that the Vikings will be willing to at least give him a shot to prove that he's the number 2 guy, and move on from Thielen because, again, KJ Osborn's cheap. He's young and he's been pretty productive the past 2 years. Now beyond him is where things get a little bit messy. Jalen Reagor, I was somewhat encouraged when we traded for him, but he was just a fat zero as a wide receiver last year. But the Vikings don't have a lot of depth behind KJ and Justin Jefferson right now. So I think Reagor at a fairly reasonable, I think 2.5 cap hit right now, that he comes back, especially if he can hold on to the punt return job, which he had last year. Now, like the other Jalen is a guy who intrigues me, Jalen Nailor. Last year, again, a 6th-round draft pick, was mostly special teams until the last 2 games in the year. He showed me something in those last 2 games against that team from Wisconsin and then the Bears. Granted, it was garbage time in a blowout game against the Green Bay Packers that he caught his touchdown and got some playing time. And then the next week against the Bears, he was playing mostly in the second half, and the Bears didn't have their 3 main cornerbacks there. But he looked to me like he could run the routes. He had good hands. He was getting open consistently, and he had good yards after the catch ability on those catches. So I'm intrigued to see. I think the Vikings have to really look to pay very close attention to Jalen Nailor in the offseason to see how is he progressing under Keenan McCardell and whether he can take a bigger bite in the offensive snaps area, and maybe he becomes your number 3 guy. I'm not supremely confident about that, but I think he showed me enough at the end of the year where he's in the mix to be given that chance. And then beyond him, you got Tristan Jackson, who's some people thought he was going to make the team out of training camp last year. He had a pretty decent training camp, but he's pretty young too. He could be, but he's a guy that you're not going to bank on. Free agency wise, if you're looking to add a veteran, if you move on from Thielen, right now the free agent market at wide receiver is pretty disappointing, I would say. Mm-hmm. There ain't much there. The only 2 guys that would interest me, granted, some guys are going to get added to this wide receiver free agent pool who aren't on there now because they're going to get cut from their teams. But right now, the only 2 guys that I'd be really interested in looking at would be Darius Slayton from the Giants and then DJ Chark from the Lions. But I think that I'd be surprised if the Giants don't re-sign Slayton. He was pretty much their top deep threat and their top receiver, and I think Brian Daboll would want to keep that. So I don't expect, but even if he doesn't come back to the Giants, there's going to be a lot of interest in his services, and I don't think that the Vikings could outspend some other team to get him. Same thing with DJ Chark, who didn't have a big year with the Lions, but he's had a 1,000-yard season in the past with Jacksonville. He's big, he's fast. And the 2 games he played the Vikings, he actually had pretty good games against us. So the talent is
A
there,
lot of
and
people did.
yeah, that's true. That's true, Dave. Very true. But the talent is there with Shark, and in the right situation, I think a lot of teams are going to look at the things that he does and his speed and his size, and they'll think in our situation he can really work. So
Well, and I've got the ages up there. I've
yeah,
got the asterisk on DJ Chark's. He'll be 27 at the beginning of the season. That's what the asterisk's for. Whereas your Giants receiver will be 26. Those are decent ages.
they
They're
are.
not, past 30 for a wide receiver. So those are possibilities. As you look at the grades, they're relatively equivalent to what Adam Thielen did, roughly. And we can go back to look at Adam's grades real quick. They're about the same.
Mhm.
So, uh, and you got to look at what quarterback was thrown to them. At least they're younger and have more of an upside rather than we know Adam Thielen's on that downslope of his career. These guys should not be on the downslope of their career.
They should not. But being as I don't think that these guys are realistic options for the Vikings unless something happens. But one guy that I think to keep an eye on, and he just got released on Wednesday, is Robert Woods with the Titans last year. Now, NFL fans who follow the whole league would look at and say, well, why would you cut Thielen and bring in Woods? Woods had a worse year than Thielen last year, which is true. But we all know that the Tennessee quarterback situation was a bit of a mess after Tannehill was done for the season, and even before that, he wasn't playing all that great. Uh, Woods is almost 3 years younger than Thielen, and he is very familiar with the Sean McVay passing offense. And Kevin O'Connell knows him very well. Woods was at LA the 2 years O'Connell was offensive coordinator there. He was also in LA the 3 years that Wes Phillips was on the Rams staff. So those two main offensive minds on the Vikings coaching staff know Robert Woods very well. And Woods, like I said, he's 30. He's a pro. He's always been a guy who could get open. I think that another thing about him is that he knows the importance of blocking well, and that's something that is very valued in the Sean McVay influenced offense.
And if you look
Um,
back at his scores by year, they go way up. He's up in the 70s and 80s on
yeah,
his grades in previous years. He had a decline this year, so it is what it is.
I think if the Vikings you move on from Thielen, but they're nervous about their depth, which they should be, and they're
Mm-hmm.
looking for a veteran who gives them a little bit of comfort. Robert Woods is a guy who you can keep an eye on because of the familiarity with Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips and the Sean McVay offense, and the fact that you could probably I think he's a guy the type of wide receiver he always has been. He's smart. He's never been a burner, so he had to get open with route technique and being a technician and that sort of thing. He's a guy that you could probably still squeeze another year or two out of, even a 1 year type
Well,
deal.
it
And
all comes down to how much for how long, as to
yes,
whether it's a good deal. If he's a space filler and a reliable one, and it's cheap, yeah, I'd take it. Purple Haze, you had him on your fantasy football team, I see, and no points. There's a lot of players that are very, very good players that don't score points because the way the offense is implemented, they're not the red zone guys or they're not the primary targets. And we've seen that on the Vikings a lot. CJ Ham could get, one, two, or three touchdowns a season, or used to in the past under Zimmer, and hardly be used during the entire game, where somebody gets used 1,000 snaps and gets two or three touchdowns. And it's all in how they're used. That's why if you play fantasy sports, you got to look into that if you want to get the best value. Who are the guys scoring points? I learned that we had a points league. It was you didn't get points for yardage or receptions or anything like that. It was for touchdowns. So they had to score. So you started looking at players differently. who are the players that are producing scores, and then you go with the highest ones there. They may not be the best in their position, or they may not be superstars, but they're always the one that got the ball, right? If you had to take fullback, you took C.J. Ham because there's a good chance he scored a lot. And that's just the way you got to look at it when it comes to fantasy football. Not that I'm an expert, and I no longer play anymore, but just a little bit of advice. But we appreciate your inputs there, very, very much so.
Yeah, Mary said she's got some concerns about Woods. You would be based on his, he got injured and missed half of the year before, and then last year he wasn't very productive in Tennessee. But I think you got to look at the situation too, and his age,
and
all those things. But again, a possibility if you're moving on from Thielen and you want a vet who's been productive in the past and knows this kind of offense. Robert Woods is a guy that jumped out at me as somebody who might be a potential target. Alan Lazard was mentioned a little bit earlier. I expect that he'll be back with Green Bay, but he'd be a great guy to pick up. You talk about somebody who can block. Lazard can block. He's a monster blocker, and productive wide receiver too. But I don't think he has much interest in leaving Green Bay. Unless Mr. Darkness leaves town, then maybe he'll be looking to get out too. I don't know. But even if you're Lazard, Woods, Slayton, all that free agent stuff, really I think that where the Vikings need to find and look seriously at where they're going to find their number 2 guy long-term is this draft class in 2023. You got a bunch of guys lined up there. It seems like every year now we're talking about how talented, how deep the wide receiver class is coming out of college. And this year isn't any different. There might be there's probably going to be 20, 22, 23 wide receivers drafted, just like last year, maybe even a bit more. And it's a diverse talent pool, Dave. If you listen to the scouting reports, you got the dudes who are the all-around guys like Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith and Najigba, who are there. Who can do it all. And then you've got the big fast guys like Quentin Johnson or Cedric Tillman from Tennessee, Rashee Rice from Southern Methodist University. And then you've got the smaller guys that are super, super explosive dudes who are more slot, look like they're slot guys, Downs from North Carolina, or some Marvin Mims from Oklahoma, or Nathaniel Tank Dell, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago from Houston. And then so there's there's even a Deebo Samuel prototype in Kayshon Boutte. So lots of guys that are very enticing talent, and they have different strengths and different weaknesses. But I'd really like to see the Vikings take a shot at a wide receiver. Even round one, somewhere between round 1 and round 3, I think they got to look at taking a shot at the guy who can be their number 2. And a couple of guys that really interest me, not that I'm a college expert, you talk to Tyler Fornes about that sort of stuff, not me, but Rashee Rice from Southern Methodist is a guy who really intrigues me. He's about 6'2", 6'3", over 200 pounds. You talk about productive. He had over 90 catches last year, well over, I think, 1,600 yards, a gazillion touchdowns, and he's steadily improved his production all 4 years he was at Southern Methodist. He was never a zero. He was always productive, and he got better every year. His production got better every year. We haven't had a wide receiver with that kind of size with the Vikings for quite some time, I think. Another guy but Rice is probably a second, third round dude, and probably more second round and maybe even first round if things go really well for him in the combine. But a guy that you could get a little bit later is also big, is also intriguing, is this guy called Andre Iovisis. I think I'm pronouncing that incorrectly and butchering it, but he's 6'4", over 200 pounds, a track athlete from Princeton, the Ivy League. Reading the scouting reports on him is that he's got if you're drawing up a body for the perfect wide receiver, apparently he's it, and he's fast, and he's a pretty good route runner. But you probably get him a little bit later in the draft. He's not going to go as early as as Rice and some of these other guys. But just a couple of names to think about in the draft. But there's a whole lot of names that you should be paying attention to, because the Vikings, every year except 2018, they've drafted a wide receiver at some point in the draft. And even though they've got not very many picks right now, I think that they really have to look at drafting a wide receiver this year and a little bit earlier than they did last year, to get that number 2 guy as Justin Jefferson's running mate in the future, because we do need that number 2 guy. And I think this draft class could be where you find him.
It could be. It's wild at how open Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell are to who they're going to pick and the strategies they're going to take going into this one, because they are limited. They've only got 5 picks. Are they going to trade down to get more picks? Are they going to trade players to get picks? Or how are they going to generate picks? Are they going to be trading up and losing picks? And how they put that all together, and with Brian Flores coming on board, how they want to rebuild that defense that was 31st last year, and so bad. How they do this, you could see it in multiple ways. Whether you go defensive line, interior defensive line, you go quarterbacks because we need quarterbacks. Whether you go, we need a wide receiver opposite JJ. All those are valid approaches.
Yes, they are.
If there's a blue chipper drop, Schmitz,
yep,
best center in ages, gonna be a star. Do you pick him up? We need a center, as of right now. It's all, do you trade? Jason's talking about trade back as many times as you can within the first, and gain more picks. That's a possibility too. It all depends how the board falls, who's taken in front, who they're targeting, who they want, as to which route they go. I'm sure they're already pre-planning already, prior to the combine with all this. Well, if, what happens? We talked about it previously. What happens if AR-15, Anthony Richardson, drops into 23? Yeah. We talked about that on Monday, right? Because there was talk that he may not even make the first round initially. He's got some raw talent, but he screws up on a bunch of other stuff. Well, now Anthony Richardson, with all the talk over the last 2 weeks, now looks to be like the 3rd or 4th QB off the board and may not make it out of the top 10. It all depends on how everything falls. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. It's going to, as Mary said, it's going to be an exciting draft. Thank you, Mary.
They always are, but this one, yeah, even more so, because there's so many ways the Vikings could go with that first pick. Like, do they stay? Do they trade down? And I think there's got to be. I'm 100% convinced that Kwesi is going to be wheeling and dealing to get more picks, because I don't think with what we got to work with now and the roster positions that we have to fortify. I don't think he's going to be satisfied with just 5 picks in this draft as a way of helping with that roster addition.
Well, when it comes to the draft, I think he's singing along with the Clash and Dalvin Tomlinson, should I stay or should I go? And that's the way this draft's going to work out. It's going to be a fun ride, folks, and we're going to be here for you, with you, on all 3 days. That brings us to the end of segment 2, which of course brings us to our favorite subject of all subjects, beer.
Beer.
Lake Monster Brewing has been our sponsor for quite a while. They're our partner. They do great stuff, brew absolutely fantastic beer. What they have on tap this week is the same as they had last week. They didn't get to sell it out this week. I wonder why. Turns out there was a little bit of snow up in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So what you need to do is get out, get everything shoveled, be nice and safe. Nice clean roads, everything else. Get out with your friends and try something new. And as you can see, they've got a sort of a warm theme going on with the coconut stout, the margarita goes, and the hot apple ale, and the mango guavo sour. It sounds like, just by the names of these beers, that they want to be down on some warm, sunny beach somewhere enjoying, a vacation. Well, you can take that mental vacation just by going across the river into St. Paul, Minnesota. It's just across the river from Minneapolis. Try out some of these great beers and meet some new people and have a fantastic time at Lake Monster Brewing. I highly recommend it. Their beer is awesome.
It is.
On to theme 3. The quick hitters.
Second week in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Quick hitters. It's that time of the year, Dave.
Yeah, but we got a little bit nuggets of news that fall into this category. So this week we're going to talk about it.
We are, and the Vikings have, as a lot of teams do this time of the year, they've had some movement on their coaching staff. Got Brian Flores signed on as defensive coordinator over 10 days ago, I think it was, and they've had a couple of defensive coaches who got fired. Greg Minuski, the inside linebackers coach, and of course Ed Dontel, the defensive coordinator. And then they've had 4 other staff move on to other teams with moving and getting a promotion. You've got it up down there, but I guess the big news on the coaching side is that Brian Flores is now starting to shape his defensive staff, and he's brought in a couple of guys to fill holes on his staff. 2 guys that he knows, I think, pretty well. Where he got Mike Saravo, who was your slide shows, was the Panthers linebackers coach. He's replaced Minuski as the inside linebackers coach for the Vikings. And then the other guy was Lucas Bennett, who's now your defensive quality control guy for the Vikings. And he was on the staff as an assistant with Flores from 2009 to 2021. Saravo he crossed paths with Flores back in Boston College, in Flores' Boston College days, and Saravo was a graduate assistant at the time when Flores was at Boston College. So Saravo has not worked with Brian Flores in the NFL on a defensive staff, but they do know each other. And the Panthers linebackers last year performed pretty well, which would be, I think, that's I think an important thing for this hire, because when it comes to the staff position guys, like the guys that get most of the publicity and the attention are your head coach, of course, and then the coordinators of your 3 units: special teams, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. The positional guys and the defensive quality control guys, unless it's some big name, like remember when Mike Singletary was Leslie Frazier's like special projects dude or something like that. You heard a lot about him because he was Mike Singletary, but if you can get a really good positional coach, somebody like Keenan McCardell, they can make a big impact on your offense.
Andre Peterson did for years on the defensive
for years in defensive line, and it appears he's doing it again in New York, or was it in Buffalo? Yeah. So, but Saravo is one of those guys where I think he's an interesting hire, because again the Panthers linebackers were pretty good last year. Now they got some good ones, Shaq Thompson, that sort of thing. But he's gonna have a job ahead of him, because either the Vikings, it's talked about, the Vikings might get rid of both of their starters, Jordan Hicks and Eric Kendricks, in which case he's going to have 2 new inside linebackers that he's going to have performing at a pretty high level for this defense to help this defense improve to where they need to improve in 2023. Or either if both the Vikings bring both of them back, I don't think that's going to happen. I expect one of them to be gone at least. But if they're both back, then he's got to get them to play much, much better than they did in 2022 for the Vikings defense to get where it needs to be in 2023. So he's got a big job ahead of him. And I think Bennett, it'll be his impact on the team might be a little bit harder for us to notice, because all the attention is going to be on Flores and what he's doing in his defensive system. But again, Flores is bringing in some of his guys, and hopefully that'll lead to a better performing defense and a better coach defense than we saw in 2022.
And so mostly a more aggressive defense. This is where I like Brian Asamoah as an interior linebacker, because he's going to be in Flores' defense. It's, see the hole, see the runner come through the hole, shoot out like a missile, into the hole, blow that sucker up. That's the sort of aggressive play we want from our linebackers. And with the new linebacker coach, that may complement what Brian Flores wants, and we get that. And that's got to improve from what we had, so we're better against the run. And then if they can go back and pass coverage, yeah, that's good, fine, okay. But your linebackers, your middle linebackers, are there to stop the run. That's their primary responsibility. That's why play action works, right? You want to suck those middle linebackers in. It's to guard against the run. And if they're good at it and they can explode to the line, tackle at the line of scrimmage, it makes the offense one-dimensional. It's the only way they can beat you. And then guys start teeing off. Then the ears go back. The butt goes up on the defensive ends, right? Dalvin Tomlinson starts pressing on his gems on his hand, and they go for the quarterback.
Mike Harrington was asking who did Flores draft while he's with Miami to help their defense. That's a good question. I'd have to look at it. I do know that the year that his last year's head coach, they drafted Jalen Phillips, a defensive lineman, I think, or he's an edge linebacker now. And the games that I saw, now Flores wasn't there this year, but the games I saw Miami play, Phillips was a load for Miami on defense. So if Flores had any role in getting in the decision to draft Jalen Phillips on that team, and I imagine he did, he was the head coach and running the defense over there, then that was looks like it's a pretty damn good pick by Flores there. That's one that I think I can point out, even if it didn't end up, I can't remember what kind of year Flores had as a rookie in 2021, but last year, the games I watched, he seemed to be, he was a guy who was noticeable out there.
Mm-hmm. Hey, but it's a good deal, and I'll write that down to check. Who are some of the defensive players that Flores drafted while he was in Miami?
Because we know in 2020 in particular, they had a top 10 defense. But Mike makes a good point. Like, did Flores inherit a bunch of guys, and then that he wasn't responsible for bringing in that were already there but it still, I don't think negates the impact he could have, because sure, maybe he didn't bring in a lot of those guys, but he's coaching them to play at a high level. And that's part of coaching, it's a big part of coaching, right? Work with the guys you got and make them better than they were in the past.
Well, and we see it. And it goes the opposite way too. The opposite way was Zimmer had Hitman being one of the best safeties in the league.
Yes.
All those years, just maximizing what he does well and does this. We got in last year, new defensive coordinator, Ed, and Ed changed things up, and Hitman, though he's, statistically still had a decent year, 5 interceptions and such, he wasn't doing the things we were used to, the blitzing and the causing havoc. And that was coaching. You had a great player, made worse because of coaching. You can also have it the opposite way of a player made better because of coaching, and that's what we want, and that's what we expect from Brian Flores and the staff he assembles.
Yes, 100%.
That brings us to our next quick hitter.
I want to talk about the passing of Red McCombs, Dave. And a guy that, it's unfortunate. Although he was 95, so he lived a long life and was very wealthy. So things could have been worse.
3 professional teams,
3 professional teams. But, McCombs is the kind of guy I just wanted to mention and reflect on a bit, because I think that, Raymond, we have talked about that. The guys following him, but don't want to oversell
something you want to watch in free agency.
Yeah, for sure. But McCombs, he's a guy that I have mixed feelings about as an owner in his time there. When he bought the team in '98, After the Tom Clancy debacle and all of that, it was we were just thankful that somebody bought the team and
Well,
was
and it
going
was
to,
unfortunate for Clancy.
yeah,
I very much
because
like, I've read, I think, all of Tom Clancy's books that he wrote. Now, there's ghost authors now, but that he wrote. He fantastic author. And I thought Tom Clancy would be an absolute fabulous owner of the Vikings. And it almost happened. Do you know what stopped it?
he didn't have the money because of a divorce settlement, I believe, is what stopped it.
Bingo. It's a life lesson to all men that as much as we love them, they can mess things up for us. Yes. He got a divorce settlement right before the deal was going down, and she took half of his wealth, and he no longer had the finances available to make it happen.
But be that as it may, with that whole Clancy debacle, I mean, there was a lot of uncertainty about how the Vikings, the future of the Vikings in Minnesota. And
Right.
so when McCombs stepped in there and bought the team, that solidified them staying there for a bit. And his first year as an owner, things couldn't have gone much better, right? That was the 98 15-1 season. We all know how it ended, but that's been probably the funnest season I've had as a Vikings fan. That I remember well. There was some years in the '70s I didn't really get to watch them that were pretty good too. But yeah, so things went pretty well for McCombs. It couldn't ask for much better. He's got the team. They're still in Minnesota. Yay, yay. But then as his inability to get a new stadium deal done to replace the Metrodome, he started getting a little bit, that was soured him. And he also, then there was like rumors about, are the Vikings, he's going to move them to are they going to be the San Antonio Vikings? Are they going to be the Los Angeles Vikings? And so and all that uncertainty about the Vikings and whether they're going to stay in Minnesota cropped up again. And then the perception was, and I don't think it was a perception, I think it was actually
It was
true, was
reality.
that
He went cheap at that point.
yeah, he went cheap. He wasn't investing the resources into the Vikings that you'd expect from an NFL franchise, while other franchises were. There wasn't any investment in training facilities or anything like that.
Yeah, he
He went
let
cheap
Winter
on
Park cook
coaching.
down the tubes. Air conditioning wasn't working. Ice machine wasn't working. You saw Mike Tice carrying in coolers worth of ice. He didn't care. He was taking all the money he could out of that because he knew he lost the battle. The whole interest in getting the stadium, lost that. You had the great years under Denny Green, then it exploded. Then he went cheap. The smallest coaching staff, by far at the time when he elevated Mike Tice from line coach to head coach. And it was sort of a sad chapter. Winter Park went into disrepair. It was about the time Ted and I went up for a draft in 2007, was it? When we got Williamson.
Well, that would have been the 2005 draft.
2005. We went up for the draft party, and the boat was falling apart in front of Winter Park. There was weeds growing up on the hills. It was not a good environment. And I remember during the draft party, Red McCombs came out, was doing his purple pride, purple pride, purple pride, and we all started booing. He was not liked at that point in time, and it's a shame. And it's I do believe he loved sports. He always
yes.
did, but he also loved making money, and he didn't see the opportunity. Now, it was Purple Haze talked about. It was a chief buy back then. I think when he purchased it, the purchase price, I think, if I remember correctly, and I'd moved to PCS to Grand Forks in '97. This happened in '98. I think the price then was, I think he got it for like $200 million.
I think it was 250 million actually.
Okay, 250,
somewhere around.
But it was in that range. He turned around and sold it when he did sell it for $600 million. So he made a profit.
Yes. He did.
Gutted it and sold it for $600 million.
And that was, as I understand, that was kind of one of Red's MOs on the
Mhm.
sports end of things. Anyway, was when he owned the Spurs and the Nuggets, he bought them, and then he didn't own them very long, and got rid of them, fairly quickly. But again, we wanted to mention that, and kind of for younger fans who don't remember the Red McCombs days, they started out pretty well, but got sour quickly towards the tail end, and people have complaints about the Wilfs, but when they bought the Vikings from Red McCombs, some uncertainty about the Vikings' future in Minnesota then, but the Wilfs have been able to get the stadium deal done. They have, gotten the new training facility state of the art. They've improved the fan experience, from what I understand, at TCO Bank Park with the whole Ring of Honor thing. Like, and at at US Bank Stadium, they've got just so much Vikings stuff about their history and that sort of thing. And so they have invested in making the Vikings uh,
Uh-huh.
look and feel
It
like,
is a premier spot
yes,
in the NFL. They have spent money, and they have spent money on players.
mm-hmm.
Anytime that we want to, the front office, be it Spielman or Kwesi, wants to renegotiate and pay bonuses and, uh, you know, to get cap compliant and stuff like that, they've written the checks. There's
Yes,
been no balking. Here's the checkbook. Write it. When they read when they say, "Hey, we're going to take this much money and convert it into roster bonus," that's check time. Here, write a check. That comes out of them, and they've been willing to do that. They have not been. Oh no, I don't have the money. Most NFL today is like that. There are only a few teams, I think the Raiders, that are family owned, where they have to run it. That's their living. A lot of
I
them
think the
are,
Bengals are as well.
yeah, a lot of them are billionaires where it's, hey, I love the sport. I do this because one, it's a money making machine being part of the NFL, but because I can and I can make it the best I can. The Wolves are part of that. Jeff Bezos is talking about buying the Commanders, right? It's now become where the majority of the owners are multi-billionaires. And whereas Red McCombs back in the day was 100, 200, 250 million to buy it. Wolves bought it. They bought it for 600 million. The Vikings are now supposedly worth 4 billion. It's
It's not a
it's a
bad return
business,
on
but they're
investment
not.
when they decide to sell it.
Yeah, but it's not stingy. They've invested tons of money, and not just the facilities, which is state of the art. There is no better in the NFL. Now you might argue Jerry World is bigger and fancier or whatever, but the U.S. Bank is absolutely gorgeous, and all the land development around it and all the stuff that goes with it, they've done a ton. And I'm thankful for that. And for the most part, they stay out of the football business. And that's appreciated. Sometimes I wish they'd stay out a little bit more, but hey, that's the
Mhm.
owner's prerogative. But this comes down to Red McCombs. He was an owner, he's part of the history, and he has passed on, and we hope he rests in peace.
Indeed. Jonathan taking a shot at Cousins in there too, so we can expect him back next week when we talk about quarterbacks, perhaps.
Yeah, Jonathan, you want to join us for quarterback talk next week when we go over the final section of the offense, the quarterbacks. That should be a fun one. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the show. And I again want to thank everybody that joined us. You guys have been great in the comments. Absolutely appreciate it. Michael, I agree with you. I don't think we win the big one until we get that franchise quarterback. So let's get that franchise quarterback. I'm all for it.
We've been looking a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when does the combine start? This week, right?
That was, you mentioned that it was this week earlier. I haven't
Yeah, I think it's this
actually
week.
double checked on the dates on that, and I thought I would have saw a bunch of articles pimping it already, but hadn't really
Yep.
noticed much.
February 26th, tomorrow. Defensive
Mm.
line and linebackers report.
Oh boy, underwear Olympics begin.
Yes, let it begin. Monday, they have their registration and pre-exams and orientation and interviews. Tuesday, it goes on to general medical exams, not medication. I'm sure that's part of it. Pre-ordered studies and team interviews. They don't get onto the field until Thursday. But it all starts tomorrow, and it will last through Monday, March 6th.
And that's where I don't watch the actual combine stuff. Like, I find it really boring watching guys go around cones and that sort of thing. But, if you like that sort of thing, great. I'll just read about it. But it is interesting because you're going to start hearing about, oh, this guy's rising and this guy's falling, and this guy you never heard of is now going to be picked in the first round. And also, sometimes you get nuggets about players, veteran players, not the draftees, but what free agents going where, or who's going to be dropped.
Because
You'll hear about all those talks, all the GMs chewing the fat about potential who's going to go where. Where's Lamar Jackson going to go, and all this stuff. So we expect lots of news coming out of the combine. And it's not just all going to be about the guys who are at the combine, the draft eligible guys. It's about the guys who are in the NFL right now.
Mm-hmm. So we should have quite a few topics go along with our State of the Vikings quarterback edition next week.
Yes, looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Any last words there, buddy?
Nothing at all. Just it'll be next week. Will be combine and more combine.
I want to thank everybody again for joining us. And what do we say?
We say, and when you're gonna give us the kudos, Mr. Worthless Opinion, your opinion is not worthless. Awesome. Thank you for saying we did a great show. But we always say, Skol Vikings!
Skol Vikings! Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite aggregator. And a special shout out goes to our partners, the Daily Norseman, where the best Vikings content can be found, and to Lake Monster Brewing, home of the best beer in Minnesota. Skol, everybody.